Welcome, everyone. This is the Kundalini Collective podcast, I think number 13. And we're really lucky and blessed today to have Katie Mottram with us, who both Alan and myself know as a good friend. And we've both worked with her, and she's helped us both in our journeys in different ways. Kate has really helped with the UK's mental health profession and the idea of spiritual awakening. And I remember when I first met Alan a few years ago, he told me how much Katie had helped him with his process, and I actually saw the difference. And then when I met Katie a few years later, we worked together on a couple of films called A Call to Awakening, which I think we're both very proud of. So anyway, I'm going to give it to Katie to let her introduce herself and I guess tell her a little bit about her story and her spiritual awakening journey and how she ended up where she is today. Okay, Katie.
Oh, thank you both. Lovely to be here with you. 13, lucky for some. Oh gosh, I never know how to introduce myself when I'm asked now. I think, I on one level, I'm just constantly changing, emerging, becoming someone new every day, like this evolving kind of a self. So I guess on a sort of 3D human physical level, talk a little bit about my history and what brought me here. So my background is mental health. I've worked in mental health for over 25 years. And I was led to that because of my experiences that happened when I was a child. And we've spoken a lot about this, and I think we'll probably cover this today, but I've never really considered my experience as a Kundalini experience. But the more I sort of read around this area and think about the topic, it's definitely been an energetic awakening of like a soul, a life force energy in me. And I think, so that overlaps right with the term Kundalini. But because I didn't have a big energetic process going on in me physically, I didn't identify with that term, but I think it's kind of nuanced. So yeah, I was always an existential questioner. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, in terms of like how to talk about my story and where did it start. And actually, I remember as a very young child, I was an existential questioner. I always used to ask the big questions: who am I? Why am I here? I remember having sort of metaphysical type experiences when I was a kid, laying in bed and like watching in the corner of my room, kind of go in and out and thinking, oh, time and space, and just being really curious about who we are as humans and what is time, space, reality kind of thing. And I just pushed it all down because they're the kind of questions you can't really talk about within Western society. Um, and then when I was a teenager, my mother made quite a brutal attempt to take her life. And at that point, I then found out that she'd also tried to take her life when I was born. And so that then really catalyzed even more existential questioning for me. Why am I here? Like, what's life all about? Do I actually really belong here? Am I supposed to be alive? Um, but I went to work in the mental health system to try and kind of work it out. And I guess now looking back, to try and protect myself from kind of going the same way, really. But I just had this intuitive knowing. So my first job as a young 20-something-year-old was on acute psychiatric wards, like the old school, like, Victorian type hospitals. And I just had this innate knowing that the narrative that I was being told wasn't right in some way. And I'd sort of gone with the intention of, I'll do well, I'll achieve as I'm supposed to in society, and I'll do my training, and I might even become a doctor, who knows? But I just couldn't go through with the training because I just had this kind of I now, I guess, perceive it as a moral injury. Like it was just feeling more and more split. I was connecting more with the patients on the ward than I was with the staff. Um, and even back then, I remember thinking, this doesn't make sense because people are supposedly having what are called delusions, hallucinations that aren't real, but there are patterns in what people are talking about, and people are talking about the same kind of experiences. And I'd started to read about it, and like people all over the world were saying the same thing, and people were saying things like, you know, I am God, or people were writing quadratic equations on their hospital wall. And I was thinking, well, if this is a broken brain, surely there should be as many different delusions as there are many brains of people that are unwell. So even back then I was thinking there's more to this. Um, but you know, I was young, and I didn't have a very good self-esteem because I guess of everything I'd been through as a child. I grew up in a family where I wasn't big emotions weren't allowed. They were suppressed, and so I didn't deal with my own trauma. I pushed it all down. You know, typical archetype of rescuer, went in and focused on helping everybody else, and just pushed down my own trauma response. And you know, we're talking 30 years ago, so it wasn't really the era where we were talking about emotions as well. So yeah, so that's where it all started for me. Um, and I kind of lived with this internal split and questioning until my early 30s. And I, you know, did what I was supposed to do as a good Western woman. And I got married, and I, you know, worked, and I felt like I'd failed, to be honest, because I didn't qualify as anything. I went to university, but I didn't really know what to do. I was very much an interdisciplinary thinker, so I studied interdisciplinary human studies, which didn't qualify me for anything. Now it makes complete sense why I did that, kind of come full circle. But I just lived with this internal confusion, and that eventually led to me breaking open and having a crisis following a suicide attempt, um, where I took up sort of yoga and meditation, after also failing at the suicide attempt, and starting to do some self work. And yeah, it was during a meditation I just had a spontaneous awakening, in my early 30s, and that's where it was all catalyzed. I was like, oh, okay, this is what I was been trying to search for all of those years. Yeah. So I don't know. I've probably gone off on a bit of a tangent there. I don't know whether you want to talk about the experience itself or.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could talk a little bit about the experience, because this is a spiritual awakening podcast. So what happened? How did you cope with it? How did you find it? Somebody who works in the mental health profession, what were you thinking, and how did it change you?
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, so the experience itself, I was in meditation, and for the first time ever, my thoughts stopped. And then everything hit me like a freight train. It was just like this kind of gnosis, this knowing, where this information all kind of came through me. And I started to, I guess, automatic write, channel, and start writing down. And I remember coming out of the meditation, I'd written three like A4 sheets of theory that I'd never even seen before, never heard of before. And I was in quite a euphoric state. It was like you know, the stereotypical bliss experience where it was like, oh my gosh, everything makes sense. All of my anger went, all of my fear went, and I existed in this state for about 3 days. And I was having telepathic experiences. I had all of this. I wouldn't describe it as Kundalini energy because it wasn't something coming up my spine, but I was in an energetic process for sure. I could see energy from trees. And I was working in the mental health system, and I had enough knowledge to kind of know that, like, okay, if I tell anybody about this, I'm going to get sectioned, or, you know, I managed to kind of function and You know, I don't think I was sleeping very well for those few days, but I was just in this bliss state. It was amazing. It was like, this is what I've been searching for. This is kind of given. I felt like I had the answer to life. You know, this whole messianic, like, oh, okay, I can save the world kind of experience. And in that in that moment of meditation, I was given the message that I'm a vehicle to help be part of creating a new conceptual framework for mental health. It will be redefined in terms of spiritual emergence. And I was just so excited by this. But then I kind of had to squash it all down to go to work. And that was the point when like the pendulum swung and I started to kind of come back into my so-called logic brain, and I started to question my insanity. And to me now, this really speaks to reframing, you know, experiences that are called bipolar. You know, I was in this bliss state, it was hyperactive, it was high energy, felt connected to everything. And then I was plummeting into, but I'm crazy, I must be psychotic. All of my emotions were all over the place, all of the, you know, the stereotypical opening of all of my trauma that was unhealed starting to come up, things that I'd repressed. And so, yeah, it was the start of, that was 12 years ago. And it's taken me, you know, we talk about in the spiritual emergence world, these experiences take 10 years to sort of integrate and make sense of. And I would say pretty much I've only just started to become grounded enough to really, really ground and practice my experiences in a very balanced way 12 years later. Yeah.
So you talk about the swing of the pendulum, the initial bliss state, and then quite quickly there's let's say, a swing towards something a bit more anxiety, perhaps more trauma, more repressed trauma coming up, a very negative experience, and that seems to be a pattern in many people. That was a pattern in myself as well. Now, I've got a few theories about this, but do you have any thoughts about, firstly, why does it do this? And secondly, is there a way to prevent such a massive swing in the future?
I mean, that's a huge question. And I think that's been part of my navigation and integration journey up to now, and why I'm doing the work I am doing now, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But I think for me, this is about the integration journey. This is about integrating kind of our physicality, our human experience, and integrating that energetic, that spiritual, whatever terminology, universal life force, into our human experience. And I think that is the pendulum. And the more we integrate, the less the pendulum swings. And I do feel like it's a really vital part of, you know, the education for the mental health system, is these people who are having these extremes of experiences, because the extreme isn't being supported, nor is the processing of the embodied trauma. And for me, it's definitely about coming into contact with my body. I recognize that it's really interesting, actually. One of my experiences really early on was looking down and thinking, oh my goodness, they're my hands, I'm in my body. Like, and I'd realized like I'd been dissociated from my body for all of my life until that point. And so it's been a real journey, and I'm still learning to be really in touch with my somatic processes and my embodied sense of what I'm thinking and feeling from a heart space, from a somatic space.
I want to bring Alan into this because in 2017 or 18 when we met, Alan, I met him before Emerging Proud and after Emerging Proud, and there was a big difference. Alan would seem very, like, he emerged from one of your big conferences, very positive, about the process. And I think he met you at one of the conferences. So maybe Alan, you can talk about how did you meet Katie?
That's not quite chronologically right. But no, my sort of Kundalini awakening, my explosion, because I had an incredibly sort of difficult first few months, and I shouldn't really talk about myself. I have to give a bit of background. I mean, I was blown off my feet, so I ended up being in the clutch of the mental health services for a while, which was a incredibly negative experience. And so I viewed it all as being really quite traumatic and negative. But a year later, in 2017, May 2017, a friend told me about this event in London, which was the launch of Emerging Proud, and which is coming out of the spiritual closet, which I thought was a great expression. And anyway, it was a really inspiring event. There must have been about 200 people there, and there were links to people in a whole number of different countries. Same launch event. Excuse me. And the point being was that I think when you go through these experiences, whatever kind of spiritual awakening it is, it can be incredibly isolating. And so I met at the Emerging Proud a whole number of other people who'd be going through different kinds of spiritual awakenings. And that was a turning point where I realized actually this is not a curse. There's a gift here. And also led me wanting to do what we're doing now with the Kundalini Collective, in the sense there's a huge power and connection between people. And I'm sorry I've gone off on one. I've forgotten what the question was, but
talk a little bit about Emerging Proud. So Katie can talk about how she started it, but also Alan, you experienced it as someone who was going through a spiritual awakening, and it really helped you.
Absolutely, because it was so Emerging Proud was emphasizing the positive transformative opportunities of going through spiritual emergency, going through difficult awakenings. And I think for many people, especially when there's unhealed trauma, these awakenings will be difficult, because basically the trauma comes to the surface after the initial blissful experience, and it has to be processed. But meeting others who are going through comparable experiences is actually so powerful. Now, when you've just felt on your own, and when you've been pathologized, because then you meet other people who have a positive model. It's not just seen as psychosis, but actually a doorway to a more integrated, true way of living. So as a punter, so to speak, I found the Emerging Proud incredibly important. And also Katie went on to get funding for peer group facilitation, which I was involved in as well. And that was a great project where we had very good training to actually start our own peer support groups. So I don't know what the experience is like for yourself, Katie, but because obviously for you that must have taken a huge amount of energy to get that all going. But
sorry. Yeah, do you know, I look back, Alan, and it's like, it tires me out actually just thinking about, this is why I know it was such a high energy process I was in, because I mean, so I had my experience in 2012. I was very lucky. I was led to the Spiritual Crisis Network. I was desperately trying to sort of seek an alternative support ironically outside of the mental health system, because I knew they couldn't help me in the way that I needed to be helped, that wouldn't lead to me being pathologized like my mother had been. Because she'd said that her experiences were spiritual. I do feel like I'm a lineage of female ancestors where this has come through. So I was led to the Spiritual Crisis Network, and I'd organised some conferences with them, and I'd recognised there were people all over the world that were saying the same thing. It was irrespective of culture, of kind of, background or religion. They were all coming to the same conclusion. This is about connecting with the higher source, and we're all connected. And then in a meditation in 2016, I was basically told you need to start a social, like, grassroots movement for people, to provide a platform for people's voices to be heard who feel that they've been sort of silenced and marginalized by being pathologized. And I didn't know what I was doing, and I just set up this really basic website, and I started a blog, and I invited people to share their stories, and it was, like you said, called Emerging Proud Through a Crisis, emerging from the spiritual closet to tell our stories. We're not crazy. And the strapline was reframing crisis as a catalyst, as a possible catalyst for transformation. And it just snowballed, and people resonated. And it, like you say, Alan, I think within 10 months or maybe even less, we'd got emerging proud groups in 12 countries. We'd made a film. We launched in London, like you said, and we zoomed in the 12 countries. It was an amazing event. And I realize now, I was creating my peer network for me to be brave and talk out about my experiences, because I was feeling isolated, because, I had to move away from some friends who didn't really understand what I was talking about, or who I felt like I couldn't talk to about it. So it wasn't, I thought I was doing this for everyone else, but actually I was doing it for me as well. It's been an incredible movement, and something that I wish I could have kept the momentum going for, but I never had any money, and it was just, it's been a challenge, but so incredibly, like, I'm so grateful to everybody that took part in the film and that shared their stories, and it became we set up a publishing company, and we published 6 books, and it's just, it's been an absolute incredible journey. And like you say, we set up peer support groups for people to come and talk. And then COVID kind of put a kibosh to some of it, because we lost funding, and then things changed. But I just trust the process of the journey now as well, and I've decided to kind of go back into the closet a little bit and hide away, and bring my experiences into academia, because I was realizing, we still live in the world where people want empirical evidence, and the only way that I'm going to have any kind of a voice in creating any kind of policy change or creating any change is having credibility. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. But so it helped, thank you, Ellen, for saying it helped you, but it's helped all of us. And there's part of me that, I watched the film back and I cringe a bit, because it was done on no money, and it's all very grassroots and basic, but it looks unprofessional, but that's the whole point. We're just a grassroots movement, it's not about being shiny and professional. So it's about being real and raw. And I got some criticism from people who are saying, it's not just you're kind of framing it in like you emerge proud and it's this positive experience, and I can understand why now. People could have felt invalidated, and it's like, I now caveat it by saying, these experiences are incredibly challenging, but they also offer the opportunity for transformation. It's not a binary thing, is it? It's a both and.
Actually, I'm going to ask a question just relating to that. I mean, and I know there's no absolute answer to this question, but have you any thoughts about why some people come through the more difficult part of it, and it becomes, they see the opportunity and it becomes a positive transformation, but some other people might get stuck? Have you any ideas on that? Just any thoughts?
I mean, I've got hypotheses, and I'm now researching, and I'm having to be really careful in not sort of jumping to conclusions before I've done research. But I do really feel strongly that it's linked to the complex impacts of trauma, what age someone has trauma, what impact that has on their cognition, our nervous system, the socio-political aspects of mental health, the fact that, you know, we're living in this pressurized consumer capitalist society that is taking us completely away from who we are as natural beings. You know, it's transpersonal psychology world talks about a healthy, holistic human. It is interconnected, and transpersonally connected. It's like we're connected within ourselves, with each other, and with our environment and the world, the you know, the ecosystem, and everything about life takes us away from that. So I saw there was an article in The Guardian this morning on social media about saying 20,000 people in the UK are now off work with mental illness, with the words they used, every month. And we need more access to experts to help these people with mental illness. And I think there are two very, very wrong things about that headline. It's like we've totally hyper individualized these problems and called them mental illness, when actually there's so much now narrative around wisdom in trauma, the fact that we're breaking down in order to highlight what's kind of not healthy in the world. You know, Gabor Mate talks about this, the myth of normal. So it's like, is it something wrong with the person, or is that person actually awakening to the fact? I love Thomas Hübel's work around, he talks about we're living in this like mass freeze at the moment where everybody's disembodied, we're all dissociated from our emotions, or we're all in this freeze state. So actually people are thawing out and we're getting in touch with our emotions and we're feeling things. So we're breaking down because we can't cope with the stress of the capitalist system because it's unhealthy. So it's highlighting a problem within our environment rather than, I think, within the individual. Well, it's obviously more complex than that. But also it's like, no, we don't need more experts to get these people to be able to cope back with what's wrong in the first place. You know, it's very much around, I'm involved now with a lot of lived experience peer support education, and everybody is saying, you know, I don't want an expert, we are here to hold space to allow the wisdom of each individual to come through. And I absolutely think we're in that movement now. So I'm going off on one now. I can talk about this. I can talk about this for hours.
It sounds all good stuff to me, Katie. Makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
All of this is really good and also very relevant. I don't want to stray away just yet from your work with the mental health profession, public policy, and spiritual awakening, because you did make some inroads, I remember. For example, you had a conference in London that I was there doing some filming, and you had the power threat. Was it the power threat meaning?
Power threat meaning framework. Yeah.
So you were trying to create a way to bring people in the NHS and the mental health profession to be able to understand and then diagnose a spiritual awakening. So you were making some inroads. Can you tell a little bit about that journey, what you think is making it difficult for the mental health profession to accept spiritual awakening, and what you think might be working and where we could be going with this?
Oh gosh, okay, crikey, that's big questions, isn't it? Yeah, so the event that you're referring to, that was with Lucy Johnson and Mary Boyle, who are the couple of the lead authors of the Power Threat Meaning Framework. Brilliant pathologizing kind of approach to mental distress. You know, and I was saying this is brilliant, but it's a biopsychosocial model. We need to include the spiritual. And then it was a whole conference around how do we include it. And I think overall we came to the conclusion that spirituality is not a separate thing. It's it's just an integrative part of being wholly human. And and what do we actually mean by the word anyway? But I think, yeah, so I've had a bit of a journey with the whole concept of spiritual emergence, spiritual crisis, spiritual emergency. I think it's really helpful and it's really necessary for people to understand these processes, and the fact that, you know, it's actually a very natural part of being human to tap into realms beyond us. And I know, Samir, you're interested in sort of the metaphysics as well, and I've got interested in that as well, like consciousness and what exists in the field, the quantum field beyond us. So I'm interested in that. I'd be really interested actually in seeing more like leading edge experts from interdisciplinary fields coming together to have conversations to talk about how to move it forwards in terms of policy, because I think we're too siloed. So just having the mental health field make changes, I don't think it's going to work, because I think we're moving away from even needing terms mental illness, mental health, because these aren't quantifiable things. You know, there are no biomedical markers to say this person has this disorder or whatever. You know, there's so much evidence now to say that's just, it's a social construct. But I think, you know, in terms of people recognizing this, these experiences, the work of Stan Groff has been, you know, obviously foundational, amazing. But one of the things that I've come to in my journey is actually, so I don't know if you both know the term differential diagnosis, which, so some people are talked about having, you know, these experiences that are spiritual awakening, and some people have a mental illness. And I find that whole binary categorization actually quite unethical now. I find it quite ostracizing, marginalizing. Anything that creates a split, creates a binary. I don't think it's progressive now, to be honest. So the research that I'm looking at now is like looking at, is there a category, like a definite split, or actually are these experiences so overlapping that we can't differentiate, and actually it's unhelpful to differentiate. So there are big movements within the recovery movement. So one of the things that the Emerging Proud Stories were part of was a research study by the University of Nottingham and the Institute for Mental Health called the Neon Study, Narratives Online, which was looking at a non-medical intervention for people who are struggling, to be prescribed stories of hope and recovery instead of given medication. The Emerging Proud Stories were part of that 5-year research study. And there are really great movements now within the mental health field, within, you know, and mainstream Institute for Mental Health, including people's meaning in experiences that have been called psychosis, and looking at actually these aren't static experiences. It's not helpful to give someone a label that then they have for life, because actually, you know, there's studies around post-traumatic growth after psychosis. So people do get better. So what I'm looking at doing is creating a bridge between the progressive recovery movement in the mental health mainstream world, and even the word recovery is being questioned now as to whether it's helpful, because that sort of talks about a return to something, whereas we're talking about a transformation and move forwards. It's an evolution. So we're not returning to who we were before after we've had these crises. We're becoming someone new, but it's good forward motion in the mental health field. And then the transpersonal field, which has been a very segregated part of psychology, the transpersonal psychology field, creating a bridge between these kind of fields of expertise, because it's not helpful anymore for them to be separate. And there are, you know, these really great research studies that are bringing the two together. And that's where I'm looking at sort of bringing my research into ground.
And I'm going to try and summarize what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe I'm wrong. But are you saying that rather than look at these things as a mental health issue, or any mental health issue as a mental health issue, is to look at the whole and say that society is structured in such a way that people are responding, and the way they're responding at the moment is some kind of, let's call it a mental shift. And that can involve elements of psychosis, elements of mental health issues, but rather than see it as an issue, you can see it as a response to society. And if we create the right frameworks and support for these people, they'll transform positively. So it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's not a mental health issue. It's actually a reaction that requires some kind of support in order to create positive change. Is that?
Absolutely. Lovely synopsis, Samir. Brilliant. I think, you know, it's interesting. There's so much, and this is why I'm really interested in interdisciplinary discussion around this, because I think people in different fields are saying the same thing. So there's a great philosopher, Justin Garson, who's looked at the history of psychiatry in terms of philosophy, and how the old narrative was around madness being strategic, and that we'd moved away from that, you know, the age of enlightenment and reason, where we just still became this kind of separate, you know, rational reason and you know, science, and now we're in this capitalist craziness. But actually we're talking now about, there's this shift back to, okay, so we've got an ever increasing number of people who are breaking down, who are in crisis, whether that's having energetic explosions like you described, Alan, or whether people are having dissociative experiences. And this is all speaking to the fact that we need to change, you know, the way that we're living is insane, literally insane. It's not, yeah. And I do feel like that was one of the messages actually in my awakening. It's like mental illness doesn't exist. We've got it all back to front. Like, madness is true sanity. And I was so confused by that at the time. And now it makes perfect sense.
There's something you're saying that also fits into what a lot of people, so-called in the spiritual awakening community, suggesting, is that the idea that there are more and more people having spiritual awakenings, and as a sort of, as again, there's various ideas why that might be happening. One of which is what you're saying, the fact, I mean, that I'm trying to put this into a question, because what you're saying, that in a way mental health problems or mental illness, whatever those terms are, is a way, it's a natural reaction to actually a mad society. Yeah. And actually just being adapted to a mad society is not really great mental health. So I suppose what I want to ask is, do you think that within, in a way, people going through whatever label you want to put on it, whether it's spiritual awakening, mental health problems, is an element where this could be part of the solution to the, I'm trying to think where social change happens. I suppose that's what I'm trying to tease out. Trying to tease out your thoughts where, how can, it's the society is causing this.
Yeah.
Can people having through this experience affect the society to correct it?
Do you know what, Alan? I was thinking about this earlier today in terms of, it's really interesting. And I think this is why I'm coming more and more back to like doulaing each other home. That's like coming back to this, the most important thing. I know you and I have talked about this, Samir, in terms of our film's Call to Awakening, where it's like this inner and outer feedback loop. So, you know, I think there's so much desire for people to create frameworks and models and like have theory and like understand. We have this desire, don't we, this desperation as a human species to like have answers. Whereas actually we need to sit with the knowing that there's more and more evidence. We don't have a clue what reality is. We've got a tip of the iceberg. And so actually, what is the best thing we can do for each other at this time of not knowing? It's coming back to ourselves. It's actually getting in tune with our bodies. It's healing our own trauma. And the more I learn, the more I recognize I just have to keep coming back to me. Because if I can heal myself and impact the world in a positive way and be that doula, that support for other people who are coming through the process. So I'm doing research at the moment and I'm asking people what they feel the purpose of their experience was. And everybody is saying, it gave me a purpose to support other people that are going through this process. And I think the importance of healing our own wounds and being able to be attuned in our own nervous system so that we can hold space. This is actually a line I say in our films, isn't it, Samir? Like, we can only hold space for others to the depth that we've gone to in ourselves. And I think I'm learning it more and more, because the more I'm triggered by the crises in the world and whatever's happening out there, the more I have to come back and do my shadow work, my deep attune work. So I had a colleague this week that went into crisis, and I was, trying to just be there for them on the phone and create this space. And by the end of the week, it's like the first time they've actually just been heard and held. And so they were able to then come through that and work and feel fine. But that took a lot of just being with my own, and a lot of what's coming up in the research as well is people are saying we're so open, we're so sensitive when we're in these processes. We can feel the fear of the clinician, of the person and I think this is maybe linked to the question you asked, Samir, is what change is needed within the mental health system. It's about dismantling the hierarchy and actually people that have been through these processes supporting people, because everybody is saying if they had their experiences suppressed by the mental health system or that narrative of being medicated because the clinician is fearful, because these experiences are scary, right? They can be highly energetic, they can be weird, people are saying bizarre things, which actually, when you really unpick, a lot of the time makes sense, even if it's like symbolically or metaphorically. But if we can teach clinicians to hold a space, and that means coming back to themselves and doing their own embodied healing, and actually this is something I'm looking at creating now, is a course around this. I think that's the key. It's like, yeah.
So I'm seeing a journey in your life from your own spiritual awakening to looking at mental health, to realizing, if rather than looking at it from a mental health perspective, to looking at the structure of society, what is really going on in reality, what is the model for reality, which includes consciousness, and that's where your research is. So before we go there are a couple of things I want to pick up on. The first is just to go back to this idea of differential diagnosis, and I want to be clear. Do you see any difference between a mental health issue and some form of spiritual awakening, even if it's unconscious spiritual awakening? Do you see any difference? Are you saying that all mental health concerns or issues or points are in some form, some kind of awakening experience?
I mean, it's a big claim. It's a contentious topic, and it's probably something I shouldn't be saying as somebody doing research. But I do have a sense that everybody is swimming in the same quantum field. And so we're all having the same experiences, but we're experiencing them differently because of our different lenses that we're coming to interpret them with, different journeys, different cultural backgrounds, different ways that our trauma has impacted our cognition. You know, there's so many complexities involved in this, but yeah, I feel it's really unethical actually now to say we can differentiate, because we don't know. And actually, what's the kindest, the most compassionate approach for me is to say, it's not to say, oh, you're having an awakening, so you're special, and you're you're having a mental illness, so you're just crazy. That's not compassionate. That's creating another binary. It's creating another split. You know, a spiritual awakening is about interconnection and recognizing we are all interconnected and we can't evolve and leave anyone behind. We're all on this journey together. And the more I think that the initial phase of, like I was saying, you know, having this awakening and feeling like we've got all the answers to save the world, and that messianic kind of process that we start with is coming back to, I don't have any of the answers. All I can do is do my best to heal myself and do my shadow work, and then be compassionate as I can to everyone around me. That's where I'm at now.
And I think I agree with you. I think I'm very much coming to your perspective. One other thing I want to raise, and you actually last year or the year before that, you put me onto this. It was Professor Joanna Moncrieff's the chemical imbalance paper that came out, where she said there isn't any evidence for serotonin enhancers to actually it didn't affect people's depression. So in America, for example, there's a pharmacological response to a mental health issue, depression, and what they do is they give medication, but actually it might not be a chemical issue. If it's not a chemical issue, then we're now talking about something in the realms of consciousness, in the realms of the mental, in the realms of the quantum field. It's not something that you can just give a pill to. So then if we start to look at consciousness as a kind of unifying field, everybody exists in that space, as you say. Some people are opening to this, and their way of dealing with that opening is sometimes, if they're trained or supported, quite open and positive. And sometimes if there's resistance, it can be quite challenging and difficult. But everyone's existing in the same universal space. So, I mean, would you tend to agree with that, or do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I have. And I mean, I guess my thoughts and my understanding around it are still quite basic, but the more I'm reading, the more it's kind of making sense to me in terms of what I was thinking like 30 years ago on the acute psychiatric wards. It's like, how do patients who are diagnosed with schizophrenia or psychosis suddenly start writing, like, why do they start writing quantum equations on the wall? And like, why do a lot of people say I am God, right? So one of the people I've come across is a philosopher called Bernardo Kastrup, who I think is incredible, who talks about analytical idealism, that consciousness is fundamental. So he talks about the quantum field and the fact that, you know, and I know, like, as Samir, we included the lovely cosmologist Jude Currivan in our Call to Awakening films, who talks about this same sort of quantum field in terms of everything's always in motion, everything's in formation, in formation. And Bernardo Kastrup talks about, this is a really basic way of explaining it, but talks about how we're all dissociated alters of the universal conscious field embodied. So we're all like the universe coming to know itself. So for me, it makes perfect sense. When someone's had a trauma, which means they dissociate, they reassociate with the conscious field. But there's so much information in the conscious field that our brains just cannot assimilate it. It's just an overload because we don't have a framework for it within the Western culture. I think Samir, as an Indian, like, possibly your you know, that the ancient philosophies will understand this more than our Western models can. But it makes perfect sense to me, because in my research, people are like, suddenly we had savant abilities. Suddenly, and you know, people term this quantum field as God energy. So then it makes sense to me. People are like, I am God, because we are, right? We're just embodied tiny, you know, particles of this same quantum field. So actually, people saying I am God or I am Buddha, if they're that, you know, whatever their religion, they might interpret it that way, it makes sense. So actually, would it not be more helpful to say, okay, so am I, what should we talk about that, rather than injecting them or medicating them? And like, actually, let's give people the freedom to make sense of those experiences. And everybody is saying in my research as well, like, one of the things that put them into the fear space and actually plunged them further into depression was feeling like they were unheard in what they were trying to express. And I don't know whether you've come across this. This is like my Bible at the moment. It's the most comprehensive book that I've found to sort of talk about all of this stuff. It's by Lisa Fannin, and she's incredible. But it's she talks about hermeneutical oppression. So hermeneutical meaning meaning. So people feel that they are oppressed in making their own meaning of their experiences. Yeah. And so that's kind of what I'm aiming for, is to try and create space for people to feel hermeneutically liberated, I guess.
I'm going to just very quickly do a bit of personal sharing that, because in my professional life, I've worked as a community worker, also as a social worker, and the basic thing about social work, basic value is sort of non-judgmental, positive regard, and actually listening to what people are saying. Now, when I had my experience and I was in hospital for 6 weeks, I was incredibly anxious, but the psychiatrist had his model, and he was determined to say I was depressed. And even when I was discharged, to my GPs, Alan had been through a absolutely severe depression. He sees it as anxiety, but it's depression. And I think this, sorry, when you, somehow psychiatry loses that, it's you know what, one thought I've had, which it's everything reflects the overall society, and so in that sense, obviously, psychiatry is but a reflection of the madness of our present society, and over the years, and also, you know, the drug companies make quite a lot of money out of drugs as well. So there's that dynamic of prescription. I'm trying to put this in a question, but I suppose, are you trying to say that what needs to happen is the actual experience that people are going through, that the person experiences in that experience needs to be allowed to be in control of the narrative, rather than the professional who will perhaps put people into these diagnostic categories? Is that what you're saying? Is who controls the narrative?
Yeah, and you know, I think what you said, Alan, around, you know, we're kind of it's part of the quantum, like what's talked about in quantum as well, isn't it? It's like we do create our reality. So the way things are framed and perceived does form a trajectory, actually, as to the outcome. So if we think about it in those terms, then actually it's an ethical imperative to frame these experiences more compassionately, because we are creating the trajectory of their outcome. But yeah, I mean, so I've lost track of what you were saying there, Alan. But I think it's it's obviously it's tricky because we can't just be, it's not just like going, okay, let's just ditch everything and like it be a big free for all, because people are in, you know, lives are at risk. There are safety elements. So, but I think it's giving people more freedom. And actually, you know, the World Health Organization released some guidelines in October last year saying that actually people are going to have more autonomy in how their experiences are interpreted and supported. How long that will take to come into life, into fruition, I don't know, but there are guidelines around it. But yeah, I mean, we've got to do it in safety. But I think this is where, for me, the person holding the space, or the people holding the space, and how they hold that space with love, with an attuned nervous system. Thomas Hubel talks about this as well. So we can co-regulate with the person who. So when you talked about your experience, Alan, so you were in massive anxiety. So your nervous system, you were way out of the window of tolerance, right? We talk about Stephen Porges' work and the window of tolerance. You couldn't manage that. So if you were held by people who were calm, who were telling you it's okay, this is a process, it just needs to go through, looking after, caring for your basic needs, making sure you had enough sleep, making sure you had good food, access to light, access to nature, could express if you wanted to, music, art, whatever, talk about what you felt was going on for you without being told you're crazy. You know, like that's the spaces that we're talking about being needed. And yes, it's complex, but it's also, it's simple as well, actually. When people are saying, that's one of my questions in my research, is what did you ideally need? And everybody's saying peer support, somewhere safe to go, in nature, good food, access to light, access to grass, which you don't have in hospital, you know, not filling yourself with fags and caffeine and surrounded by concrete, but, you know, really basic needs of health, holistic well-being, access to holistic, you know, embodied movement or expression of energy through, I met someone at a Spiritual Crisis Network conference once, a lovely young guy who just said he was pinned down by police officers because he was a big guy, he was like loads of energy, and he said all I needed to do was bang on a drum. And it was like, yeah, there's just so much fear around these experiences.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's what you're describing sounds exactly what's needed to me as well. And exercise. We were locked up. I wasn't allowed. All this energy. All you could do was you couldn't do anything with it.
Yeah. And actually, important thing that we don't talk about as well, which has been sort of just, you know, it's taboo in society, isn't it? It's like we have innate sexual needs and energy as well, and actually these experiences can be interpreted wrongly as sexual energy as well, because we don't talk about them. I worked in a male prison for a while, and it's like, of course there's going to be anger if you've got guys cooped up together with all of this testosterone and nowhere for it to be released, and no one's talking about the fact that these are natural human needs, you know. We've just created this crazy silencing of all of our, you know, shadow aspects as well, which we need to talk about.
There are two things I want to talk about. So the shadow is definitely, but your research, your work, where you are now, or how you got here. Also, maybe we can talk a little bit about our film, Force Awakening, as well, because some of the concepts that we talk about, including the shadow, is in that, and how we got to that. Where do you want to start?
You tell me. I can go off on a tangent anywhere, but
let's talk
your
about
podcast.
So let's talk about it chronologically. So Alan introduced us. Thank you, Alan. That was in 2000 during the COVID. No, actually before then, it was 2019. But it was actually during COVID, we were in lockdown, that somehow or other we began to work together
Yeah.
on a film. We weren't sure what it was going to end up being, and I'll put a link to it in the notes. But it was I think quite a nicely made and quite an engaging film. And I think we were looking at what the pandemic meant to people. So it wasn't just, I'll speak from it from my perspective. It wasn't just a conscious spiritual awakening. It was the idea of almost an unconscious global awakening, which was to do with the fact that when the ground is taken away from your feet, you're in a crisis, and you have to start embracing new perspectives, new ideas, and of itself, that is an awakening. And so I was trying to draw an analogy between a spiritual awakening and a global awakening happening during a pandemic. And I still believe that to be true, that there is a global awakening happening and continue to happening. The spiritual awakening that we're talking about is a conscious awakening, where we are actually aware of what's happening. And then there's an unconscious awakening. And we delved into things like ancestral trauma, very, very importantly, shadow work, maybe with a key thing at the moment. You produced the films, and you also, I didn't know many or even any of the interviewees, but you brought together a really great bunch of people, including the cosmologist Joe Corovan. You can mention other people as well. Phil Bourget, who did the great documentary Crazy Wise about shamanic awakening. A really diverse bunch of people, and we put together this film. We did online road shows. It's available online to watch, and it was really a precursor to what's happening. Any thoughts about that, and anything that you took away from that experience? You mentioned the feedback loop between internal. We talked about the anything that you do that's internal work. There's also external work happening. There's a feedback loop between we call it inner work and outer work. The two things go hand in hand. So I'll hand it over to you, Katie. What were your thoughts, and how did you think those films?
Thank you for that opportunity, Samir. It was a brilliant project to work on, and it was a very sort of organic process, wasn't it? It sort of had its own evolution. We didn't really have a plan. It just kind of birthed itself, and I think we've still got it kind of hanging in the ether a possible third film, right? The vision, and maybe that will come to fruition one day. Who knows? But it was, lovely to work on that with you. And I don't know. I think for me, the thing I've taken away from it really is this sort of idea of this infinity, like inner and outer feedback loop. And we talk about it at the Alef Trust, where I study at the moment, around the importance of doing our inner work, our shadow work, because we are then reflecting that in the external world. And I think what you talked about, it's like we looked at the meta perspective, didn't we, of a spiritual crisis, spiritual awakening, spiritual emergence on the planet, as opposed to what goes on in the individual. But it's the same thing. It's like framing a crisis as an opportunity. So what actually is this mass awakening, this mass global crisis that we're in at the moment? It's this whole paradox, isn't it? There's more shadow coming to light. There's more corruption coming to light within governments. There's more war. There's more polarity going on. But actually, is that cracking is that crisis providing opportunity for positive transformation? And I completely believe it is. And even if I'm deluded, I think it's the healthiest option. It's the healthiest perspective to hold, to keep sane within a crazy world. The fact that we have to be moving towards creating a new what does and I think ultimately it's about embodying heaven on earth. It's about creating this heaven on earth, isn't it? That's what we're talking about. And before my awakening, I was from an agnostic family. I wasn't religious at all. I hadn't even sort of thought about the concept of religion or God, really. And now I have a very strong faith, and I don't consider myself religious. And I don't tend to use the word God, but it's the same thing for me. So it's a mission, it's a pilgrimage. It's why I'm here. Ever since I had that moment of awakening, it's like that once you pop, you can't put it back, can you? Like once it's like just becomes this lifelong mission. And I think the learning and the growing will happen until the day we die. And this transformation of the world is not going to happen maybe within our lifetime, but all we can do is be part of the momentum towards it. And I'm absolutely dedicated to that for the rest of my life. So it's exciting. I feel it's really interesting. And this is difficult to say in some groups of people at the moment because there is such horrendous stuff happening in the world. You know, also locally in terms of, you know, poverty and you know, all of the horrendous stuff that's coming to light. But I feel excited as well. It does feel like some new way of being is sort of coming through and emerging.
Do you feel that there's some kind of process going on in the background, a big global process? Could you say something on your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult to like make it tangible, isn't it? It's just a sense. It's a sense, and it's like I think I'm like I've got quite interested in astrology as well, and like recognizing how connected we all are to the planet, what's going on a planetary level as well. And it's like we are in time of Aquarius, and I think it's that's becoming very evident. It's like the patriarchal, the masculine has driven and obviously we've all got masculine and feminine with energy within us, but we're coming into this time now of more feminine where we're trusting our intuition, we're being more in touch with our bodies, we're reconnecting with our hearts and acknowledging that hearts, you know, our heart wisdom is powerful. And I feel like that's the shift that's going on, is like this collective movement towards more flow, what are considered feminine ways of being within men as well as women. Yeah.
How important is shadow work to all of this, like individually and collectively?
I mean, it's undeniably vital, isn't it? I mean, I think what we're seeing in the world at the moment is a projected shadow of what we're all carrying within. We all have an inner, you know, archetype of murderer, of person that goes to war, of, you know, whatever. And if we deny that in ourselves, then it becomes bigger outside of us. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment. And so, you know, doing our own, and a lot, you know, if people don't, I guess people within your collective will understand what we mean by shadow work. But, and I think sorry.
It might be worth defining it.
Yeah, so I mean, I've come to, because I think one of the things that I struggle with a lot within the whole differential diagnosis and spirituality movement is the denial of the shadow and the whole narrative around you have an awakening, it's all love and light, it's all bliss, and it's like that's bollocks actually. And that's a really dangerous narrative to hold, and I get really cross with spiritual teachers that because it's a way of denying our own trauma processing and actually stopping other people from trauma processing. We had a mutual friend that took her life a couple of years ago because she was very attached to the label of I'm having a spiritual awakening. And so that was, you know, she didn't have the opportunity to do the trauma work, the shadow work. And so she just became so disembodied and ungrounded and just couldn't come back. And it was horrendous. And I think that's the risk. And so acknowledging our shadow as not like it can be perceived as this bad, dark, you know, negative thing, but actually if we're compassionate to, it's just our wounds. It's like it's the wounds that we carry, maybe ancestral wounds from our intergenerational traumas that's trying to come through us to heal, but also our parts of ourselves that are wounded from, you know, our inner children or whatever. I've had to do a lot of work myself on because of my own attachment issues as sort of abandonment stuff, as my mother trying to take her life as a baby. I've learned a lot about the impact of that on my own nervous system and also attachment stuff. But I love the work of Richard Schwartz and internal family systems therapy. Talks about parts work and just the compassionate approach to shadow work, because we have to love that shadow to integrate it back in. If we push it away and deny it because of shame or whatever, then it just becomes bigger. So yeah.
And can you just talk a little bit more about the spiritual bypassing? Well, there has been a side of the spiritual awakening world where it seems that spiritual awakening is blissful, especially if you look at a lot of videos online to do with Kundalini. There isn't no mention of the shadow or the painful journey. A lot of it is about bliss and orgasmic experiences. So what are we really talking about here? When we talk about spiritual awakening, are we really saying that the true spiritual awakening, or the true awakening, spiritual or not, is painful? And actually, that reminds me, you used to tell me, and I think you're right, that actually leaning into your pain, feeling pain, is one of the key things that we can do, and society teaches us to run away from pain. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that to me, because I think that's part of shadow work, isn't it? It's leaning into our pain, it's leaning into our wounds. And it's this cultural expectation that we're okay, we get on, we rush forwards, we push all of our emotions aside. It's that article that I mentioned earlier in The Guardian, like, people are breaking down, so we have to get them experts so they get better, so they can go back to work. No, we need to stop and we need to question what's the deeper meaning that's going on here. So yeah, why are people feeling the pain? What's the wisdom in the pain? Sorry, I've lost track of what you asked me then.
It is about feeling pain, because society at the moment, the medical world, the mental health world, the psychiatric world, is about medicating to avoid pain.
Yeah, it's suppressing, and that's the whole sort of age of the Enlightenment, Cartesian split, isn't it? Like, we push down our feelings and we become productive beings that are, we're just walking around with our brains, and we're achieving, and we're doing scientific advancements, and we're logical beings. And whenever we have a feeling, we have to medicate it because it's wrong. And actually, I think that was the message in my awakening. It's like, we've got it all back to front. And I think, okay, that makes complete sense to me now. And I think we're starting to acknowledge this as a like you're talking about that collective, Alan, and what's happening. I think this is what's happening. Everyone's going, hang on a minute. Oh, something's happening here. And yeah, maybe there is more to this. And I think the fact that more and more people are breaking down is an indication that we are something's starting to shift. And the fact that, we need to start talking about, I mean, hasn't there for a few years now, all of these campaigns around it's okay to talk about mental illness, and anti-stigma campaigns, which I think perpetuate the problem, to be honest, because they often talk about, I've got bipolar and this is what, and like claiming your label, and it's like, it's totally missing the point. To me, the deeper point of what's going on. So yeah, the shadow stuff is, I think the fact that we're seeing the shadow, it's easy to go, I'm a, and you talked about the spiritual bypass thing, Samir. I think, it's about being compassionate to that as well, because it's a coping mechanism. And I recognize, I can look back and recognize I was stuck there for quite a few years, because I was like, oh, I'm this now important person doing this big campaign, and my ego was loving it, because it was like, oh, all of this sense of worthlessness I'm now doing something that makes me feel like my life is worthwhile. And so it's energizing. But, you know, it's like then it's dangerous, because when you get people who, particularly spiritual gurus or experts that are teaching this stuff, like your ego's bad, it has to be shattered and annihilated. It's like our ego is so necessary. And for me, the journey of integration is coming back into, like I was saying, into our body. It's grounding this, it's bringing spiritual, whatever we mean by that, into down to earth. And it's one of the main things as well at my research, and this data is very new, I still need to like analyze it properly, but some of the themes that are coming through are people are saying this was an absolutely horrendous experience, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I'm also so grateful because it broke open my inauthentic shell, and it opened me up to who I authentically am and who I want to be in the world, and now I can live with integrity. And for me, my practice, my spiritual practice, is it's not sitting on a mat meditating and being detached and like, you know, I'm gonna be detached from my emotions. It's actually, if I'm thinking, feeling, acting and saying everything that's, you know, all of that's aligned, then I'm at peace. If what I think, feel, say and do are all aligned, then that's peace. And that's what I'm practicing now.
That's a really great philosophy. And you know, it's a nice segue into your research right now. Do you want to speak a little bit more about it? Where are you now with your work? What are you doing? And you know, hopefully where is it going for the future?
Yeah. So, gosh, about, I don't know, how can I lose track of time? Maybe 5 years ago, I started to think maybe I need to start like doing some proper research, or like realizing like I don't know what I'm talking about. I need to go back and learn about all of this stuff, because it was like I was, you know, I was doing lots of interviews and stuff, and then starting to realize I don't really know what I'm talking about, and it's kind of embarrassing, to be honest. I look back and just, you know, with a little bit of compassion for myself, because I was in a process, but also with a little bit of shame, like, oh gosh, I was speaking way ahead of when I should have been. And, you know, we all do it. It's just part of the journey. And it was like, okay, I need to ground this. I need to learn more. I need to do more of my own shadow work. And I joined the Alef Trust, who just run MScs and PhDs in consciousness, spirituality, and transpersonal psychology, and it's been phenomenal. They talk about it being a transformative education, and it really is. And so I've been doing my MSc. I'm in the third year. I'm in the final year now of my MSc in consciousness, spirituality, and transpersonal psychology. And you know, it's through that course as well that I've sort of really done a lot of integrative practice and learned about the importance of this somatic work and grounding. And so the research I'm doing at the moment is a study with people who have been diagnosed with psychosis, but found the framing of having had a transformative, seeing it as a transformative spiritual experience more helpful. And I'm looking at the meaning that they've found in the experience and talking about what that entailed, really looking at, okay, let's compare these experiences that have been diagnosed as psychosis to the categories of what is called spiritual emergency, to really see whether there's any overlap or any difference. And what I'm finding is there's just so much overlap. And a lot of people talk about feeling like they're dying in the experience. And I think maybe a lot of your community might relate to that as well. When you're having this huge energetic process, it's like I was saying, the brain doesn't know how to interpret this ego death. It's like we are dying to the old version of ourselves. But actually what happens is somebody gets so frightened because it actually feels like they're dying. did you want to? You look like you're agreeing with that, Alan.
Look, that was my experience. Yes, yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
I suppose I want to ask a sub question really, but I mean, I don't know if it's something this particular research can do, and I'm not quite sure it's the area of the research, but something that obviously crossed my mind was that there'd be quite a number of people going through these experiences, and they get a diagnosis, a label from the psychiatrist, the tick box in the manual sort of thing. And those labels are often very negative. Schizophrenia, whatever, can be very negative. If someone has the framework of, I'm actually got another framework here, I'm going through a spiritual awakening. I just wonder if there's, you imagine the outcomes might be different.
Yeah.
And then just read your thoughts on that. Is there any evidence of more positive outcomes if people have their own frameworks? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of research around, and this is only MSc level, so it's not going to be massively impactful. I'm intending to write a paper afterwards, but there is research around. Actually, one of my colleagues, Charlie Herriot Maitland, on the Spiritual Crisis Network, did a study around looking at people, comparing two groups, a group that had been diagnosed with psychosis and a clinical group and a non-clinical group that had psychotic-like phenomena, and comparing the two groups and looking at like the impact of the group that had been pathologized and the group that hadn't. And they said, I think I can't remember exact wording, but the outcome of that study was that it's not the experience itself that is pathological, it's how it's framed and the impact of the framing. And that's kind of what I was talking about as the trajectory as well, like how these experiences are understood and framed impacts the outcome. And I think, I want to bring in multicultural interpretations as well, multicultural lenses. I've had friends that have gone into spontaneous mudras because they've had energy coming through them, in the psychiatrist's office, and instead of just it being allowed, it's like they get pinned down and they get injected because the fear of the consultant, and it's like these processes are so natural and normal. I know, Samir, you experience, don't you, like movements and things, and it's just the body needs to move. We're expressive beings. We have energy coming through us. It's just don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, I think that, well, a couple of things. First is, yes, I think I've constantly, since the moment it started, experienced spontaneous movement. In fact, spontaneous movement was the very first sign to me that something was happening. And it still happens today, and it takes the form of mudras, movements, or spontaneous breath. And I can feel something happening in my body when it's going on. I also know it happens in all cultures, from indigenous shamanic cultures to Jewish shaking to Sufi whirling dervishes. Spontaneous movement isn't just from one culture; it is a global phenomenon. And as somebody who used to DJ, spontaneous dancing is, I think, key to helping us embody the spirit and also to release trauma. So yeah, movement is a key part for me. But one thing I also wanted to add was, based on everything you're saying, and I'm going to now look towards the future, it seems to me like you brought Bernardo Kastrup, the philosopher, who spoke about idealism. And I just want to kind of like, now as we go into the last section and talk about the future, you're presenting in a really nice way to us this idea that actually, rather than look at this as a mental health issue or a healing issue, we have to take a look at ourselves in reality, and we have to actually work out what is going on. And it's not just a mental health thing; it's an interdisciplinary issue that involves psychology, psychiatry, medicine, physics, chemistry, biology, philosophy, and at the basis of all of it there is a unified field that we all exist in. And in essence, those of us like yourself, myself and Alan had spiritual awakenings and others. A lot of us come back and feel the coming of the universal consciousness. A lot of people have the same kind of story, that something's coming collectively, a universal opening. So it might be the case that all three of us, we're all part of this wider tapestry of people who are trying to create social change for the coming of this universal consciousness. And you can frame it as a spiritual, religious thing, like in New Jerusalem or some kind of Shambhala. You could just frame it as human evolution.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about the future, and how do you see your work fitting into it? What would you like to see happen in an ideal world?
I think what you just said there, Samir, is so important, because I think it's just, we need to reframe this as just another historic shift in human evolution, rather than it being termed as this, I don't know, because I think the word spirituality has been so misused, or it's misunderstood, or it has very, it's so charged for people as well. A lot of people have said this to me if they've been harmed by fundamental religion and they see spirituality in terms of religion, it's people shy away from that word. So maybe it's just about reframing this as like, yes, we're in this evolutionary process of becoming a new conscious level of beings. One of the things that I'm hoping to do, I've just had my PhD application accepted to start in October. I'm still waiting to hear about the funding, so it's not 100% yet, but I've got the place, and the most exciting thing is my proposal has been accepted, which is to create a radical new process model for clinical care to support people who are having altered state experiences. And I'm looking at the correlation between trauma and how altered states manifest. So definitely bringing in the metaphysics, because that's something that I've been fascinated by for years. Yeah, so that's really exciting. I'm trying to just be like, okay, Sarah, if it's meant to be, it will be. But I do feel like I kind of felt like that's what it's really strange, because I was never an academic, it's interesting because I've just found my inner geek through this as well. I absolutely love studying now. So and yet when I write a paper, it is like it comes through me. It's not me, it comes through me. I am that vehicle. So I feel like I'm sort of grounding that message I got in my original awakening. So that's how I hope to be part of the movement, is bringing more evidence and actually something tangible to bring to clinical practice, so that people can be supported in non-invasive ways that we were just talking about. But also normalizing these experiences is that's kind of what Emerging Proud was originally for, really. It's normalizing. What even is that word, normalizing? But it's just integrating these as natural human processes, just recognizing that we are so much more than just this individual physical beings. And I think the whole thing around a mental health narrative is just, it's part of recognizing that we're not individual beings at all. We are so interconnected. We are so impacted. We're so intricately connected with the ecosystem, with each other. We can't exist as individual beings. So it makes no sense that these things are individual problems. So I think that's one of the biggest things is this and why I'm really keen on not categorizing anything. So looking at moving beyond the differential diagnosis, even beyond the term of spiritual emergence, to be honest. And I co-founded the International Spiritual Emergence Network. So I was I think it's almost like a new movement. It's like a new human rights movement. And that's what Emerging Proud was meant to be as well. It's born on the, Black rights movement, the gay rights movement. It's we see these, we have to highlight these things in order to raise awareness, which we're now doing with spiritual experiences, but then they need to be integrated into the whole. And so they're not marginalized or ostracized. It's just part of an acceptable, you know, and I think there's so much still around racism and the impact of colonialism and, you know, the Black rights movement, and people, you know, people of color are speaking out more as well, and I think that's absolutely necessary. And I'm starting to learn more about my white privilege and all the unconscious bias and all of this stuff that is part of this chaos that we've created. And that's part of the shadow work, I guess, as well, is recognizing my own privilege as a white Western person.
Do you think, can I just ask a question here just to, so, you know, you're talking about, you know, your work hopefully leading to hopefully some radical change within the mental health field. But do you see you know, what you're doing, but also the whole experiences of spiritual awakening or other, you know, or mental health issues in a way that the present reality cracking in a way? But do you think that people involved in this, like ourselves and others, can there be an impact in actually changing the dominant society? That's,
yeah, do you know, I think that's what I mean about we're all doulaing each other home. Nobody's leading this movement. It's a grassroots movement, and we all have our part to play. And I think, who was it in the film, Samir said, it's about waking up to what we're here to do in the world, and it's living that purpose. Somebody said that in the film, didn't they? I can't remember now.
Yeah, great line. I can't said it.
It was a great line. But yeah, and I think that's what's happening. And it's like, you know, we're all just particles in the mass wave, right? So I'm just a tiny, tiny particle in this massive shift. So, and that's been a massive relief for me. Like, oh, I don't have to save the world. It's fine. I just have to do my minuscule part, you know? And I think that's what, like, everybody, I wrote a paper about us all being potential portals for ecosystemic transformation when we have these experiences, because I think what's happening is the wisdom is trying to come through people. It's like you said, Alan, it's cracking us open. So this wisdom is coming through, but it's coming through. Every individual person is a part of the puzzle, is a part of the process. And so in order for this process to really take momentum, this is why it's so vital that we don't suppress these processes that are coming through people. That I do believe, you know, the people that are pathologized are the ones that are birthing the, you know, it's like the genius that's coming through these experiences. So yeah, we need to, actually, I could tell you a little story about this if that's okay. We've got time. So I ran a few retreats. I think, Alan, you came to a retreat that I ran for people that had been through Emerging Proud and like wanted to. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah,
My
so
band broke down.
that's right. Yeah. So I so I held a few like weekend retreats for people to gather in sharing circles and people that had peer experience retreats, basically. And there was one retreat, and one lady had been diagnosed with, I think, bipolar disorder and psychosis before, and been hospitalized multiple times. And throughout the weekend, I'd written about this in a paper as well. She sort of started to get more and more animated as the time went on, because I think was sort of excited by what was going on and being around people where she didn't feel crazy and she could express and no one was saying you're wrong or whatever. And then at the final breakfast, she'd just started to like channel loads of information, and she just got really, really animated, and she was starting to write down loads of like research ideas about healing spaces, because we were in this beautiful retreat space, you know it, Alan, right? And it's like such a beautiful healing in nature in the Norfolk Broads, and she was like, this is it, this is what we need, this is what we need for people. And then there was a moment where she just kind of lost touch with consensus reality. But because everybody was there of the same understanding of these processes, nobody went into fear. Everyone else looked around the table and we were like, okay, we need to do something here to help her reground. And we kind of just gently held her. Someone got under the table and held her feet down. I went behind her, put my hands on her shoulders and said, it's okay, it's safe to come back to your body. Someone went and got smelling salts. We walked her around the garden with bare feet. And within a couple of hours, she was fine. And we had the final sharing circle. And she said, that's the first time that's ever happened and I've not been hospitalized. And now she's using that information that came through her in a research fellowship about crisis houses. So there was real wisdom coming through in that experience. And that's what I mean, and yet these experiences just get completely dismissed. And I think we're missing all of this wisdom that we need as a collective for our evolution that's trying to come through people.
That's a great story, and I think it sums up quite a lot, because what we're saying is that actually, as you said in the documentary called Awakening, you said that people who can hold space for others if they've only gone to that space themselves and deeper. Yeah. And maybe with people who are going through some kind of crisis, what is needed isn't academic professionals or intellectual professionals, but communities of people who've already gone through some of these dark shadow spaces. And when that person is in that space, they can actually hold space for them because they've been there themselves, and just their presence is enough.
Yeah.
And that they're also accepting what is happening to that person, and we're not judging them at the same time, which I think is probably the key. What I'm learning from the Kundalini Collective is that, and I think we've inherited to some extent some of your wisdom from Emerging Proud. It's just a safely held online space where we try not to judge people. We try to offer peer-to-peer support. We don't try to bring our own opinions into it as much as possible, but what we try and do is allow people to be themselves as best as we can.
Yeah.
And it seems to help.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I don't think it's even the wisdom of Emerging Proud. It's like you've got your own collective wisdom there, and people are saying, like you said before, we're all saying the same thing. It doesn't matter how we frame these experiences, we're all saying the same thing. And this is one of my biggest learnings, that I don't have the answer for what is right for anybody else. All I can do is hold space, learn to be safe enough in myself to hold a space for someone. And I'm still learning that, and I'm still learning to sit with my own triggers and my own fears, but it's like that the wisdom of the person is in the person. They are experts of their own experience. None of us can know what's best for anybody else. And I think that's the key. And it's all about, clinicians unlearning. And that is an incredibly scary thing to do when people have trained for years and it's threatening their livelihood. But it's a grassroots. I've always said it's a grassroots revolution. And it's like this, actually, one of the community, I remember really clearly one of the Emerging Proud community saying she had a vision where everyone that was like the underdog were rising, and all of the people in power were like falling, and everyone that was rising were kind of then having to support all of the people in power who were then breaking. It's like this, like everything was turning on its head, and it's happening.
That's a great that's a great picture. And I just want to share a thought I've had for a while, because it just relates to this. I just want to share this one. I studied sociology, so that's really influenced how I've looked at things throughout my life, really. And if you were to look at an analysis of capitalism, it's like another sort of pyramid. You need certain things need to be in place for capitalism to work. And part of that is the domination of thinking, the dominant ideology.
Yeah.
So, for instance, so in the 19th century, the terms of fair day pay for fair day work. People were conditioned to the fact adapt to the factories, and people conditioned around, you know, acquisition of possessions and so forth. The thought that I find very interesting is that so you have this system, capital, but how do you change it? Now, can you change it by the changing of the mindset? So if you can it be changed by, you know, not just in specific places like like mental health, but on a global stage by increased awareness. And I think that's, to me, yeah. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I don't think this, because it's an experiential thing, ultimately. I don't know whether you've heard of philosopher Sharon Rawlett. She talks about, I looked a lot at, because I tried to go back to work within systems, and it was just creating so much moral injury after COVID, because I needed to earn an income, and it was creating more and more moral injury, because the more I learn and the more aware I become, the more I was just having this absolute like internal split around this. I can't do this to make money, because I know it's so wrong. And she talks about moral, how there's this part, this like very real innate part of consciousness that's moral. It's called moral realism. And I really relate to that. And I think that more and more people are experiencing moral injury within whatever systems, because we're recognizing that whether it's education system, health system, mental health system, it's all crumbling. It's all not working. And I think more and more people are experiencing this moral injury, this internal split, because they're recognizing this, but they don't know what the answers are. And so they're breaking down. And so it's like we need this alternative. But yeah, I just feel like I don't know whether there's a way around it, or whether people have to sort of experience some kind of a breakdown in order to break through. I don't know whether it can be this nice. I know Paris Williams talks about in the Emerging Proud film, the chaos theory is like, in order for this like transition, it can't just be this natural sort of gentle shift to a new order. It has to be this like chaos, chaos and a new order. So yeah, I don't know. I just have this sense that on some level, everyone we're having some kind of an existential crisis.
I think I want to just before we finish, just throw in an idea. I think perhaps the revolution is happening as we speak now, and it's not a revolution that is physical or tangible at the moment. It's subtle revolutions. It's a revolution of energetic systems. As we mix and come together from different cultures, as we break down perspectives, as we share secret knowledge, which will be yoga or meditation or qigong or science or technology, people are mixing together and something new is coming. And this, whatever is new, is firstly subtle energy. Our energetic systems are changing, but as we said in our films, the internal is the external. That means that the external model, the hierarchical system, the pyramid system is going to change. The non-hierarchical system is going to come, where energy won't flow up the ladder to the top unless people have it. It's going to circulate in a much more universally fair way, a collaborative way, not competitive. And that's happening now. And because it's happening in a subtle way, people are feeling it. And that change is causing some kind of crisis. And as you say quite correctly, Katie, it's not bad, it's actually good. But we have framed change and pain as negative. And our system is there to protect people from pain and change. And the system itself, that may have been good 2,000 years ago, itself, that system does not want to shift. And it is its own consciousness within the bigger system. And so we're pushing against this consciousness that doesn't want to shift. It is an embedded state, a global state, but it will break down slowly and surely by your work, our work, other people's work, everyone who's going through the awakening process. So there is a subtle shift happening, and then a gross shift will come in the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And as that changes, I think people will be born into a system where they're more aware of the non-dual state of everything, the more aware of consciousness, the more aware of social justice and social change. So you know, we who were born in the we were born in the 70s, I think. Alan was born in the 60s. You know, we've come.
Sorry, Alan.
Yeah,
that's all right. That's all right.
We were born into a state that was embedded in dualistic theories, and we weren't, you know, the ability to speak truly and be authentic was more difficult in the 70s. You know, it was difficult to grow up as a person of color in the UK in the 70s and 80s. But these things are changing. So there is a revolution happening. It's subtle, and we're part of it, but it's also positive. And I really believe that this revolution is going to become more and more obvious in the forthcoming years. So whether it's mental health, or whether it's technology, or whether it's, you know, AI, or whether it's sociology or philosophy, change is happening in neuroscience, change is happening in all of these places, and we just have to join the dots and see the bigger picture.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I meant about being an interdisciplinary thinker. It's like, it didn't make sense to me when I was 18 choosing my like undergrad degree. I was like, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do this because I can't make a decision. And now it's like, okay, this is why, because I am this eagle-eyed sort of, I see things on this very sort of, I connect the dots, a transdisciplinary, like in how things interconnect, and that's how I see things. And I think just to speak to what you've just said, Samir, I think what I love and what I keep reminding myself of is the Socrates quote of like, because, you know, I think it's natural as well to be angry at the system and people that have been harmed, and actually recognizing that anger is absolutely valid and supporting people in that. But also it like you said, it was a necessary part of the evolutionary process. It had its purpose, and maybe, you know, it's just time to evolve beyond it now. And I think I've switched from being angry to being like, okay, it's not about fighting the old, it's about creating the new and making the old obsolete. I love that phrase.
That's brilliant. And as you say, it's coming from the grassroots. Yeah. And
supporting each other. Yeah.
Which brings in connection and love and everything together.
Absolutely.
Not love, not in a wussy way, but in a
love's not wussy. We need to stop. Yeah, we need to change that. We need to change that narrative. It's all about love. To me, it's like, that's what the energy is, you know, that's what the energy field is. It's love at the end of the day, isn't it? It's what God is, whatever.
Love and unity.
Yeah.
I think this is a great point to stop, and hopefully we'll pick up in the future conversation. So Katie, it's been really lovely to reconnect and talk to you about all these things. And is there anything we can put in the link to your work?
Do you know, it's so interesting because I don't update the Emerging Proud website much anymore. I was thinking about this earlier. I'd love to revive it in some way. But I share a lot of research, sort of calls for research on there now, some articles occasionally, and I will share a paper I write after my research study. So yeah, the Emerging Proud website, I will try and update so people can have a look at that. They can access the film for free. The Call to Awakening link is on there. Some resources. So yeah, I think that's. I tend to be hidden away with my books now rather than out speaking like I used to. But
all right. We'll put a link to Emerging Proud. We'll put a link to our films, The Call to Awakening. Yeah. And it's been a great conversation. And
lovely. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Katie.
Lovely to speak to you both. Thanks, everyone.